Disclaimer. The views expressed are the personal opinions of the participants and do not reflect the views of the Orthodox Church, the U.S. Military Academy, the U.S. Army, or the Department of Defense.
Welcome to War Priest, where you get practical Orthodox Christian experiences, specifically for warriors.
War Priest commence.
Hey everybody, welcome to War Priest. Thanks for joining us again. We've got another exciting episode for you. We've got a special guest whom I'll introduce in a bit. Please welcome also my co-host, Alexander Brasco from the Show Me State in Missouri. And of course, I'm from sunny Hawaii. So say hi, Alex.
How you doing, Father? Thanks for coming on again, and thank you for bringing our guest on today.
I've got a very special guest. With me is Father Christopher McCoy. So Father Chris used to go by Brad, and welcome. Father Chris and I served together in the 82nd Airborne long time ago during that deployment, which will live in infamy. 2508 Parachute Infantry Regiment, Fury from the Sky. I even wore my Two Fury PT shirt here for you, Father. So
Still looks good.
I'm trying to work it, trying to rock it as best I can. But we served together, lived in the same bee hut in Ghazni, Afghanistan, for a very long time on one of the strangest deployments ever that I can come up with. That was the most bizarre set of stuff that happened. And I could tell you some stories about Father Christopher. He was catechumen Brad back at the time, as I recall. And now he is a full-blown Orthodox priest in the Antiochian Archdiocese. But we'll get into some more war stories here in a little bit. But Father Christopher, please introduce yourself and tell us all about it.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks to both of you for letting me be on the show. I have been listening to a few of your episodes. All four. I don't think you've done a fifth yet, right?
This is number 5 right here, brother.
This is it right here. So I've been listening to them, and I really appreciate both of you doing this. As Alex said, right, this is for a specific audience. And just to add, Father George, to what you were talking about, I think we also have to remember that Christ and the disciples met people where they were in their ministry. And this is a way, I think, of you all meeting our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, where they're at in this ministry. I'll say guardians. I don't want to leave out our
and don't leave out the Coast Guard.
And Coast Guard. Yeah, just really appreciate the podcast. I think some of the things that you're talking about might even come up today in some of the conversation. But just to give you a little bit about myself, I'll start out with the thing that everybody always says, stop, and tell me more. And that is that I am a active duty colonel in the Army and not a chaplain. I'm bivocational. As a Orthodox priest, been a priest now for the last couple of years. I've been in the Army a lot longer than that, obviously. I enlisted in 1995, so this is my 30th anniversary serving in the military. It's the only thing I've known for my adult life, and one of those, the longest deployment that I've been on was, as you said, Father George, we were together. You were the battalion chaplain. I was a catechumen, and I'm sure we'll talk more in detail as this goes on about that particular deployment and the relationship that we had back then. But yeah, so I came in the Army in 1995, served as a field artillery cannon crew member in Korea, and then was selected to go to the West Point Prep School. Back then, I was at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and then came to the academy after that. Graduated in 2001. So a few years after Alex, and we were talking before the show. We've got some common friends. Obviously, you've been in the Army long enough. I think we all probably have common friends, whether it's related to the academy or not. And now I'm back at the academy as a full-time faculty member. I'm what they call an academy professor, which is a functional area 47 for those in the Army that understand functional areas. It is a permanent military faculty. And so I will stay here at the academy doing what I do here until I decide to retire. My current job right now is the Associate Dean for Research. So I run the research program across the academy, and just like any other university, we've got an Office of Research, and that's what my role is here at the academy. I've got PhD in civil engineering that the Army sent me to go get before I came back here to the academy. But before all of that, spent time as both an engineer, lieutenant, then an infantry captain. Father George, when you and I were together, I was an infantry officer. In fact, left the battalion staff that we were serving on together to go command a company down at Fob Warrior when we were together. Remember that? And then when I came back from when we got back from deployment, continued command for about another year, and then I went to grad school for the first time and got a master's degree from North Carolina State.
There was a lot of that going on back in the day. Several folks went off and got master's degrees. I got the master's degree in ethics, but it wasn't for a few more years after that. But so Alex is also a West Point grad. So did y'all like do your secret handshake and
we did like the
Army, beat Navy and all that stuff? You did your little.
We had to do all that before you got on,
right? Because I can't know.
It's right.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. So being a Citadel grad here, I guess I'm a little outnumbered, although I am older than both of y'all, and I might say my system might have been a little tougher that I went through. I don't know. Everything was tougher back in the old days, before we had cars.
It was. My youngest son right now is a plebe. The one that was born, Father George, when we were in Afghanistan together, is now a plebe. And I tell him all the time it was a lot harder when I was here.
Oh, yeah. Back when Robert E. Lee was there. So, but so anyway, Father Chris is... Go ahead.
Oh, Father Chris, I just, since you brought it up, you've got a son who's a plebe at West Point. So were you Orthodox before he became a plebe?
Yes, most certainly.
Did the conversation come up of serving in the military while you're Orthodox, whether that's something he can't do, should or should not do?
With him, no, it didn't, because he's been Orthodox for as long as he can remember. He was one when we became Orthodox after the deployment. We were chrismated together as a family after coming home from Afghanistan. He was one. So he doesn't remember not being Orthodox. And he also doesn't know any time when I haven't been in the military. It's not something that's even a question mark for him. Dad's been in the military. We've moved around. We've gone to different places. We've been Orthodox the entire time. And for the large majority of his life growing up, I have had some role in the church. I was a subdeacon for 9 years. I was a deacon for 3, and then I just became a priest this month, 2 years ago. So for him, no, there was no question mark. But to the point of your question, right? I know people. In fact, I have some of my own people that I minister to here. Some of my spiritual children that ask that very question: how can you be a Christian or an Orthodox Christian, depending upon the context, and serve in the military? And my response, and I'll go back, Father, to what you said in episode, I think it was 1. And that is, how can you not? I've had conversations with cadets over the last, at this point, over 14 years, I've been on and off here at the academy. I got here, not 14 months. No, that's 14. 2011 is when I first got back here on faculty. Served here from 11 to 14. And so conversations going all the way back to that point. And every time I mentor cadets who are struggling with certain things about what it means to be a warrior, what it means to be a leader in combat, what it means to be a leader of soldiers, they don't know it, but they're learning about virtue ethics through that. They're learning about Orthodox Christian ethics, what it means to be a Christian through the conversations that we have. And, you know, I'm not preaching to them, but I don't know how you can serve in the military. I don't know how you can be a leader in particular in the military and not have at the core of who you are, not something that we do. It's not some place that I just go to a couple of times a week. It's who I am. And at the core of that is love for people.
Amen.
Right? I cannot fathom being a leader in a situation, in the situations that we've been in, and not having a love for people. And so, you know, I think you said if there weren't any Christians in the military, we would have a virtue vacuum. And what a terrible thing that would be. There's a good friend of my best friend's dad is also a priest. My best friend and West Point classmate is a deacon now. Father George, you know who he is, right? Deacon John Pelican, his dad,
of course,
Father Philip Pelican, right?
Yep.
Cousin from Yaroslav Pelican, if you know anything about
Pelican, that's exactly right. Yeah, excellent Orthodox writer.
And I've had conversations with Father Philip over the years about, you know, being a warrior and being a Christian and the importance of whoever is, you know, if you are given the responsibility, and I will say the grave responsibility, at some point to have to decide to pull the trigger or not, you better be a moral man.
Amen.
You know, absolutely. And it should hurt you so bad to have to pull the trigger because you're still taking a life, right? And there should be grief there. That doesn't mean that we don't do it because of that grief, right? But there should be pain that then we need to be able to bear. And I cannot imagine carrying that load on my shoulders without being an Orthodox Christian. Just
absolutely
can't even imagine.
How could you do it? And Father Chris speaks from experience. He was an infantry officer in the 82nd Airborne. He was an Airborne Ranger, still is an Airborne Ranger. So, he wears the Ranger tabs, been to the school. Now, you were an infantry PL as well. Where did you do that?
I was an engineer PL.
Okay. That's right. You branch transferred to infantry before you came to us.
Yep.
That's right.
I branch transferred infantry when I came to you, and then I branch transferred back to engineer when I got back to West Point. So one of these days I'll figure out what I want to do with my life.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we all kind of feel like that. So tell us what you recall, because the last time we spoke, you were talking about catechism from me in Afghanistan. What was it like? What can you tell our audience what it was like to be a catechumen, to be a budding Orthodox Christian, attending liturgy and all that? What can you recall about our little field tent there at Fob Ghazni? And
you're opening yourself up here a little bit, Father.
I'm a transparent guy.
No, just kidding. As I was kind of thinking through that, because I knew we wanted to talk about this, you know, the word that comes to mind is asceticism, right? I got to go through catechism, deployed for 15 months, deployed away from my family. As we mentioned, Michael, who's a plebe now, was born. We deployed in February, if I remember right.
February 14th is when I left with HHC.
Yep. I think that's probably, we left the same day.
That same day, yeah.
Right? I remember getting on the bus with you.
That's right.
And Michael was born April 3rd. So he was born
Sophia was born December 25th on Christmas Day before that, and she was 2 months,
2 months
and change old, and I didn't see her when I came back, she was 18 months old.
Yep. And so Stephanie was very pregnant when we deployed, and Michael was born in April after we deployed. And we made the decision for me to not come home on R&R when that happened, because although at the time, remember, it was only 12 months, but we knew we were going to get extended to 15. And I didn't want to go home. Yeah. Well, most of us, everybody but you knew it was going to be. Well,
I knew, but I didn't want to talk about it.
You didn't want to talk about it. Yeah.
No.
So, you know, I was the whole time that we were there away from the family that I got to see my son, Michael. He was already 1 by the time I came home, I think, or close to it, because we delayed that R&R. So I wasn't staring down more than 12 months when I came back.
Right. That was probably a smart decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the word that comes to mind is, ascesis, because it is that being deployed, there's a lot of sacrifices happening, right? The monastic life, asceticism, is about sacrifice. There's a discipline that comes to that, and it's about sacrifice. And so, I would say that service in the military, certainly during deployment, you can pout about it, you can be upset about it, but you can also have an opportunity to really grow from it because of the sacrifice that you're making, and you're removing yourself from certain things that might be comfort, but take an opportunity to grow in that. And so, back to your question about what catechism was like, I'll just tell you, it was incredibly, it was the bright spot of the week to be able to go to Divine Liturgy, right? And as you mentioned, we lived in a bee hut. We had a lot of fun at times in conversation, fun being a relative word.
Well, different things turn fun in different situations. Right. And now, pay attention, audience, because when Father Chris says during that 15-month deployment that the bright spot of his week was to spend time with me, it just tells you how shitty of a time that was.
I said the bright spot of the week was the Divine Liturgy.
Oh, okay, yeah. All right, I get it. Yeah.
Let's be clear.
That's right, because we lived in the same bee hut. Yeah, we lived in the same bee hut, and I could tell you stories about that, some of which might be, maybe better keep those private, I guess. But let's think about a 13-year-old junior high locker room, and that's essentially how we were living. Yeah. I remember I was the H-82 heater officer. Somehow or other, I wound up by default. And then that plywood building, I don't know how cold it was out there. That was the winter that never stopped, from what I remember. And then Ghazni sits on a plateau of about 6,000 feet, and there was just this constant wind blowing, and the wind chill up there. I mean, it snowed. I was waiting for the March of Penguins to go by. But I remember the H-82 heater had 2 temperatures, right? It was full blast and off. And we had a law enforcement officer. What was his name? He was our Leo, if you recall. John. Okay, so
Sean.
That's right, Sean. Yeah. So,
John. I can't remember his last name.
I can't remember his last name either, but we had a big hole cut in the side where that plenum blasted right into his little section of the room. But we didn't have rooms. We built little plywood walls, and then we hung up a poncho as your door. And within about 20 minutes, maybe an hour, it was too hot in that freaking room. And everybody'd say, "Chaplain, shut off the heater." So I'd get up, go out in the cold, turn off the H-82 heater. And then with about another hour, it was, 15 degrees in that place. "Chaplain, turn the heater on," right? We kept going back and forth. And I used to have to go across the flight line to fill that stuff up, to fill up the diesel. And we had to wear gloves because that stuff was so cold, it'd be instant frostbite if it hit your bare skin. And then it was equally hot in the summer. So, yeah, we talk about we got a little desert experience out there, as I recall.
So can I ask a question, Father? What brought you to Orthodoxy? What turned you on to it? What led you to want to become a catechumen?
Wow. Well, I'll say that the year that we were together, the 15 months that we were together, that time of catechism for me was the end of my 10-year journey to the Orthodox Church. So I started learning about, when I grew up evangelical Protestant in my family, and all through high school, and then I came in the Army and continued that way, and came to the academy and met who is now my best friend, and he and I were on a very similar journey, and I'm very thankful that we got to do it together. And in fact, that entire family was chrismated into the Orthodox Church about 3 weeks before I was, because he got to redeploy 3 weeks before I did. And so, but that 10-year journey started when I was a cadet, and I started asking questions about what did the church look like before the Protestant Reformation? What did the church look like before the Great Schism? I think it was the last episode or the one before that, someone was talking about the timeline that they went back, and I went on a similar path, although I think they said they started with the Acts of the Apostles and moved forward, and I kind of started where we are now and moved back in my just journey of questions. And it really wasn't for any reason except that I just was curious at first of what did the church look like before this, right? We've got the church here in the 21st century. I learned about this thing called the revivalist movement. I'm like, okay, so that kind of shaped what Protestantism looks like, at least evangelical Protestantism looks like today. What did it look like before that? Oh, well, at the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, it looked kind of Catholic. Well, why is there a problem with that now? Right. And so I kind of, those types of questions, and it took me back, and I once I hit 1054, and realized that the church looked very different, and that the church that had the doctrine of the early apostles still existed today in the Orthodox Church. Yeah. And so it just became very easy for me. I will say there was a period of time there after graduating that I attended for several years a group called the Charismatic Episcopal Church. I believe
that's where you were,
right? Yeah. That's where I was. And in fact, when we started in Afghanistan, I was a lay Eucharistic minister for the Charismatic Episcopal Church.
Right.
Kind of doing, so going divine liturgy with you, doing some things on my own for the Charismatic Episcopal Church, or serving others as well, kind of doing some of that. And when we went to the Charismatic Episcopal Church, I kind of thought in my mind I was going towards the Orthodox Church. Not thinking that was a bridge. I just didn't, in my ignorance, didn't know that it wasn't. It looked like a very charismatic, obviously it's in the name, right? Church. It was liturgical, very different from the non-liturgical Protestant type churches. So it was liturgical. We had bishops, we had priests, we had confession, we practiced the sacraments, right? And everything. And it looked like, and even they said they subscribed to the Orthodox doctrine. And then I
remember hearing you say that. Right? Yeah.
And so it was kind of, I had this, it may have been through our discussion. I don't remember when it happened, but it was between John and I and some others. And we said, it's not Orthodox. Why don't we just go to the Orthodox Church? Or if they say everything's Orthodox, we should just be in the Orthodox Church. Right. Sure. And there were some other things that happened in both families around that time that, God's providence was in all of that and led us to the Orthodox faith. And it was also because of lots and lots of conversations that, you and I, Father George, had while we were sitting in that bee hut that had plywood walls and sending you out to turn it on and off the heater. You know why we asked you to do it? Because you're the only one that loves people. And if we'd asked anybody else in that chew to go out and turn the heater on or off, what response we would have gotten. Yeah, that's right.
It would have been pretty bad. You want to talk about some nasty language? That's what we would have heard on the back end of that. So,
well, that's right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that was a rough battalion, man. That was a rough battalion. That was a rough deployment. You want to talk about now? This was before there was any such thing as toxic leadership. Right. I think someone wrote a war college. Oh yeah, someone wrote a war college paper about that. I think it was published in 2008, 2009, something like that. Well, this was in 2006, 2007. We had some personalities over there, particularly the battalion commander and the command sergeant major. I'll call them by their nicknames only. We had Timmy Mack and we had Rolling Stone, as I recall. But matter of fact, the Sergeant Major used to come to liturgy.
Yeah, he did.
Remember? Yeah, he was a Romanian Orthodox Christian. I think he was Romanian, wasn't he?
No, I think it was Serbian, but yeah.
Serbian, yeah, he was Serbian.
Yeah.
That's right. He used to come to liturgy. But yeah, the stories we could tell about that deployment, I think people wouldn't really believe it in a lot of cases.
And it started from, above the battalion level.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
the
conditions were set.
Yeah.
Conditions were set above the battalion level for bad leader decisions, unfortunately.
Those folks are not in the Army anymore, and that guy got kicked out, as I recall.
He did.
And the story that I would tell about that would also violate people's sensibilities regarding sexual misconduct. So,
yes, we should not probably tell that story.
So, Father Chris,
maybe another time.
Can I ask you a question? If your son, God willing, graduates West Point, gets his commission, maybe he chooses a combat arm, maybe, something like Taiwan goes up. And if your son's involved in it, how would you or what would you recommend to your son? How should he prepare spiritually for a deployment to war? And let's say it's going to be a LSCO war, large-scale combat operations. It's not GWAT. It ain't counterterrorism. It's LSCO, and the balloon's gone up. How would you recommend to your son, as a father, as a priest, as a military officer, to prepare for war?
That's a good question. I first would tell him he's been preparing for it spiritually his entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the luxury of saying that because he's my son and I've been with him, for the past 18 years and know what he has done his entire life to prepare for difficulties spiritually. For someone who hasn't been preparing spiritually, it's never too late to start, right? And we have to, it goes back to why I feel so strongly that we absolutely need leaders in the military who are Christian, who have strong Christian virtue, as you've talked about in previous episodes. So you have to be spiritually sound so that you have that intuition, right? That gut that can drive us when the regulations aren't there, when everything is ambiguous, and it will become ambiguous, particularly in combat situations, right? We have to have such a strong foundation at our core, and that comes from discipline. It comes from repetitive practice. I remember the very first time I ever heard the word orthopraxis was from Father George when we were in Afghanistan, and we have to practice living a Christian life. We have to practice living an Orthodox Christian life. And we do that through our daily prayer. We do that through how we interact with one another. We do that through receiving the sacraments and through counsel with our priest. And if our father confessor is not our spiritual father, right? Those sometimes aren't necessarily the same. We have the opportunity to have those interactions. And that practice, I talk to my own parishioners about this. We have to practice being Orthodox Christians. We don't just show up on Sundays and then leave and go back to doing things that we did on Saturday, right? And we have to have a mindset about it. And when we do practice that, it changes the fabric of who we are. And so to your question about preparation, I need to prepare so that the fabric of who I am is strong, is unwaverable, is not going to, in the midst of a challenge where I'm staring down the barrel at something, or I'm being asked to do something that is in this gray area and I have no idea how to make a decision, right? That's not the time to then start practicing on whether or not this is the right moral decision. The moral fabric has to be woven so strong long before we go on a deployment. And so regardless of whether we think we're deploying, next week or 3 months from now, or we might deploy in 5 years, we have to be practicing our faith every single day so that we are changed over time, and the fabric of who we are becomes so strong that the decisions, it would be counter to our person to make decisions that are counter to the faith. And when we talk about,
Precisely.
we want to glorify God in all that we do, that's how you do it. That's what the saints have attained, right? And
Sure.
they didn't come out of the womb that way, right? They practiced
No.
that their whole life. And
When we
that's the
talk
beauty
about
of the Orthodox
virtue,
Church.
when we talk about virtue, it's a lifetime and it's intrinsic to the person. And it becomes such a part of the person, there's not even a decision involved. It just becomes automatic. I think we talked about that. I guess it was in episode 2 on ethics. But the old saying is, the more we sweat in peace, the less we bleed in war. That's true spiritually, most profoundly, more than physically or mentally. Spiritually, it's most profound there. So orthopraxis, sweating, right?
Yep.
Doing those disciplines and cranking through. And when you do that, it starts off as a discipline, but I guess scholars say within 21 days, a discipline can turn into a habit, and then the habit becomes a lifestyle. As Aristotle said, that which we or moral excellence is not an event. It's a practice. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifelong thing that just becomes intrinsic, becomes who you are.
So, Father, I'm gonna throw a hard question out there, and forgive me for just not prepping you for this one, but sounds like there's a good number of Orthodox Christians at West Point. Let's say there was a senior class graduating. Let's say they were graduating and getting ready to go into war. Let's go. What would you, as a priest, if those cadets, soon to be second lieutenants, approached you, said, "Hey, Father, we're getting ready to go to war"? What would you do? Like literally, what would you do? Would you, pull them to the side? Would you say a prayer for them? Would you give a blessing over them? What would you do? What can you do? And you're not a chaplain. Let's remind everyone, you're not a chaplain, right? So you are an 06, you're an officer at West Point, active duty. But as a priest, and Father George, we'll go back to you too on the same question, but if you can answer that, what would you do for them as an Orthodox priest?
Well, all of what you said, for starters. Yes, most certainly. I'll also say I'm not a chaplain, but I am a DRGL. And so the academy, I'm here. I have a ministry here for the 40 plus Orthodox cadets that are here at West Point. We do Orthodox Christian Fellowship weekly here in my house around the dining room table. And so I do get the privilege, and it is a privilege to be able to serve and minister to these cadets. And so I get similar questions. Nobody so far, none of our graduating cadets have graduated and are knowing they're going off to war. But I get the follow-ups after they've left in a text and say, "Hey, I'm dealing with this struggle. Can you help me through this?" Right. And so you started off, yes, I'm going to pray for them. I'm going to pull them aside. We're going to meet in the chapel here, the Orthodox chapel that we have, St. Martin's Chapel.
Is it still down in the basement
it's
of
still
the
in the
main
basement.
chapel?
Yes,
Okay.
it's the catacombs, which I love.
Mhm.
Right, we get to worship in the catacombs. It's fantastic. So yeah, I'm going to pull them off there, and we're going to do a prayer service for them. I'm going to give them a blessing, but I'm also going to spend a lot of time talking to them about what it means to truly be a servant leader. I do this throughout the 4 years that they're here, right? And I bring in different examples, but in a combat situation, in a wartime situation, particularly if it's LISCO, servant leadership, back to what we were talking about and how we prepare, servant leadership has to be the core of who you are. It's not, it is, and we have a perfect example of this, right?
Right.
Called Christ.
Right.
We have a perfect example of what servant leadership is. And that servant leadership is not, and the love that servant leadership requires is not unmanly, right? And in fact,
Correct.
it's the exact opposite.
Absolutely.
Christ was not a wimp, right? There's
Definitely
no
not
question.
a beta male.
No. And so we have to, I've talked to them. There's a couple of different books that we go through from time to time here, and there's some different examples of servant leadership. There's one that St. Vlad's used to put out that is no longer in press. It's called Oriented Leadership. And I can't remember the authors. It's on my library downstairs. I pulled out some lessons from there about what it means to truly be a servant leader, what it means to truly sacrifice for those who you're leading, and what it means to genuinely love and care for those whom you're leading. And if you do that in LISCO, guess what? Those whom you're leading are taking care of you.
Right.
This is the amazing thing about leadership that I think that we have forgotten. At least I've seen examples of it being forgotten, right? All hope is not lost, but we feel like that something is owed to us in a leadership position. And I've seen examples of that. It probably is at the heart, Father George, of why you and I experienced some of the decisions that we experienced when we were together in Afghanistan. People think something's owed to them. They think the people that they're leading owe them something.
Right.
And that's the wrong place to be. No, you owe everything to the people you're leading.
Absolutely.
And when they see that, they give it back, right? Not because it's owed, but because it's mutual respect, right? It's reciprocal.
Right.
It's no different than husband and wife in a marriage relationship.
Absolutely.
It is. And I have used that example. Granted, none of my cadets are married, right? But some of them are engaged, and so I can kind of have this play between what it means to be a leader and love the men and women in your platoon as a platoon leader, and what it means to be a husband and love your wife. Two different kinds of love, but the thing that's common in both of them is sacrifice.
Right.
If you sacrifice everything for your platoon, they're going to sacrifice for you. And that reciprocal is what makes that relationship work, and it's what makes hyper performance units so good. Yes, they've gone through training. I'm assuming that the training and everything to go through the CTCs and be ready, physically and tactically and technically competent. Let's just assume that's going to happen because we're talking about this from a spiritual lens. But all of that does not replace the type of leadership that just commands that reciprocal sacrifice from the ones that you're leading.
I've got to just say something real quick. So we get negative feedback sometimes for doing this podcast and even discussing the fact that Orthodox Christians are military and or that our children are going to potentially serve in the military. We just get so much, pushback from it. And I think what those individuals who look at things from the outside, big picture, you're a part of this big military industrial complex that's doing all these bad things around the world. And you know what? What we're talking about here right now is at the individual level. It's at the individual relationship level. And it's being that salt and light. It's being that selfless leader. It's servant leadership like you're talking about, Father. And I just don't think they get it. I don't think that they understand why people are serving, how you can be an Orthodox Christian and do what you do. I don't get it. You're like, you got weapons and you're killing people and you're going on these deployments to all, these different parts of the world. But you're claiming to be Orthodox Christian. Isn't that a contradiction? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that, Father?
Yeah, because I get that all the time. All the time. That's an exaggeration, but I've certainly had that conversation. I'll say it this way. I mentored a cadet, this is many, many years ago, who was struggling with some of those same things. Very common, right, to have that. And this cadet asked me to be their mentor in the particular program that they were in. And as I talked to the cadet, what I realized is that cadet had grown up playing first-person shooter games. Okay? Now, nothing against that. My son plays those too. I monitor how that happens, or used to. He's 18. I don't monitor so much anymore, right? But those first-person shooter games, hey, those can be fun. But when it gets to a point that you think killing is fun, now we have a problem, right?
Yeah.
because there's nothing fun about taking the life of another human being. And this is coming from a guy who spent 30 years in the Army, right? As Father George said, Airborne Ranger, combat arms until I got here to the academy as a permanent professor. I've been there, done that for those things. There is nothing cool about killing someone, about taking another life. And in fact, if you think that that is what the Army is about, and if you think that's why you want to serve in the Army because killing is fun or hunting people is fun, right? I don't need you. In fact, I want you going the opposite direction. Stay away. I need soldiers, and I'm using that collectively. I'm not saying anything against the other services, but that's how I speak, right? I need soldiers to be so strong. We talked about this a little bit, to be so strong morally, to be so grounded in their faith that they detest killing, but will do it because it's their duty, because this is where God has placed them today to do this, to preserve freedom for others. It's a sacrifice that they're making for others to take that burden on themselves, not because it's cool, not because it's, some fun, glorified thing that we go out and do. No, it's a duty that we've been called to do. And it's not for everybody. There's no question. It is not for everybody.
Yeah.
Sure.
I've said, being an Army spouse, hats off to my wife, Korea Stephanie. Being an Army spouse is not an easy thing either. It is not for everybody. And decisions to stay in the military have to be family decisions. When they're not family decisions, families break up, unfortunately. Right?
Father George, did you want to respond to any of those?
Yeah, I had a thought about that. For all the folks that say, well, Orthodox Christians in general, should stay out of the 21st century American military. And Alex, we got a comment from someone that you're acquainted with, talking about how he had some good points, as I recall. And I don't have the comment in front of me. Talking about, the military-industrial complex, that America doesn't fight defensive wars anymore, that America's wars are all about moneymakers for defense contractors and investors and things of that nature. And that's a great argument. And that's hard to argue against. That's true. It is a morally ambiguous situation, but not only is it morally ambiguous, it's physical and mental and spiritually traumatic, all of those things. It's probably one of the worst places that anybody could go. So if we think in our minds, where should Orthodox Christians be? Orthodox Christians need to be in situations that are the most physically, spiritually, and mentally traumatic for anybody, and that are the most morally ambiguous. That's where I want Orthodox Christians. That's where we need Orthodox Christians, in those situations. And we don't need anybody else there. If we could have all Orthodox Christians in that situation, that would be freaking great. But we don't. We do not run from those situations. When the situation is completely and totally messed up, that's where we need Orthodox Christians. That's where we need people who understand ethics and morality from an Orthodox point of view, and that understand Christ-like servant leadership. That's where we go, and that's what we do. You want to talk about morally ambiguous? Look at what Christ did. Inserted himself into a very morally ambiguous situation, answered questions like, render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God. That's a morally ambiguous question that Pharisee brought up to him. All of those things are morally ambiguous. And the Lord went there. We follow him. We go to the dangerous, physically dangerous too, right? We go into those situations and we represent Christ, because who else is going to do it?
Absolutely. Can you imagine if our leaders, not just the chaplain, but every leader before going into battle, prayed for their soldiers, prayed for the men and women they're leading, prayed for the enemies they're about to go to battle against. can you imagine if we had a culture where we prayed for ourselves and we prayed for those we're going to fight before we go into battle?
Wow.
I mean, that
it
changes the
definitely
way
changes
I approach
things.
That changes how I
Absolutely.
approach decisions, right? That changes the way I make decisions when I do that.
So you brought up something earlier. We haven't discussed it yet on our podcast. It's very important. Divorce seems to be a way of life for many in the military, unfortunately, and myself included. And there is something to be said to the difficulty of transitioning from that warrior mindset, coming back home, dealing with mama, household 6, and getting back into a groove. Your son is not, married yet. God willing, will be one day if it's his will, right? What would you advise to soldiers, Marines, anyone that's deployed? What would you advise to them? Like, what are you going to experience when you come back from a no kidding crappy deployment? I'm not talking like 6 months to Germany. I'm talking like you're going to a third world country where you're doing some really bad things to bad people, blowing crap up, and what would you advise to them?
Well, I'll tell you that if you did not approach your married life as something that needs to grow while you're deployed, you missed an opportunity. So when you're deployed away from your family, your wife, your husband, whatever the case may be, your kids, that's also an opportunity to grow together while you're apart. And so the first thing that I advise anybody that I know that's deploying is don't miss the opportunity to grow as a family while you're deployed. My wife and I did that when we were deployed to Afghanistan, and we did it when I was deployed to Iraq. So much so that when we came back, when Father George and I redeployed, it was a week and some change later that I was chrismated with my family into the Orthodox Church.
That's right. Yeah.
So they were going through catechism at All Saints in Raleigh, while I was going through catechism with Father George. And as Father George already told you in a previous episode, I was receiving the sacraments when I was there. Because Metropolitan Herman said, you're not going to deny the sacraments to somebody in combat who believes the truth of the sacraments, right? To paraphrase.
Absolutely. Amen. Right? Amen. So, some people don't like hearing that, Father.
I
Some
know
people
they don't
like hearing that. Yeah.
But hey, again, to your point, right? This is for military audience, right? These are difficult circumstances. And, I'm very thankful for that economia for when I was deployed, because I was able to go to confession when I was deployed. Well, I mentioned that because when I came back and I told that to my priest that was going to chrismate me in a week, he looked at me and says, well, you're already Orthodox. I said, well, how about let's make it official, right?
Yeah, essentially.
I'd like to, this is important for my family. But to your question, Alex, if you have missed that opportunity, coming back is even harder. If you have kept the line of communication open, if you talked about the difficult things that you're dealing with while you're deployed, shared what you can, OPSEC, we understand, but share what you can with your family. So they're going through it. You're going through it together. When you come back, it's not easy. You got to come, when you come back, the other thing I'll say is you don't do it alone, right? You didn't deploy alone. You don't come back alone. And you don't reintegrate alone. But if you have missed the opportunity, and just from practical examples, when we were in Afghanistan, my wife and I went through On Marriage together as a book. She read it here, I read it there. When we were in Afghanistan, like Skype didn't work. I can remember getting on Skype and all we saw was a frozen image, right? Things are so much different now. There's really no excuse to not be connected now. It was hard, but we would take time every week or 2 weeks, and we'd get on the phone and we'd talk about a chapter. And we went through I think, is it on marriage and family life? I think
by Chrysostom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. We went through that together. We also went through together the life of Moses by St. Gregory of Nyssa. We did that one together. You had told me, hey, pick up Orthodox dogmatic theology, right? And read it. And then when I came back a couple of weeks later and I said, hey, I'm done with that, you said, what? That's not a book you just read. That's for reference. It's like that thing.
Michael Pomazanski, yeah. Goodness.
But we took sections out of that because she's going through catechism, attending the Divine Liturgy up in Raleigh here, and we took sections out of that and talked about it. I remember having conversations about the Theotokos coming from a Protestant background, right? There were conversations that we had about that. So how do you reintegrate when you come back? You don't wait till you come back, right? That's step number one. Don't wait till you come back. But I would also say you cannot do it alone. You have to have, I reintegrated with my family because and with the help of my best friend, Deacon John, right? When we came back, he came back before me, but we lived on the same street as each other when we were there at Fort Bragg. We lived in Spring Lake, and our wives were very close. So it just made sense for us to kind of support each other as we were going through that. You have friends. Whoever's, when you deploy, you have friends. When you come back, you have friends. And if you can continue to understand how important relationships are while you're deployed, you're building some really tight bonds with the men and women that you're deployed with. Don't let that cut off every relationship that you have that you left when you deployed. Those relationships are so important because everybody's going to come back and want to reintegrate. And I think that the biggest challenge is when we don't continue to have the relationship with the people back home. Just because you're separated by 7,000 miles doesn't mean that there cannot be growth in that relationship. My wife and I have talked to young couples about that a lot. Don't miss the opportunity.
Father George, you got any recommendations? Same topic.
Man, as an Army chaplain, I want to say about 90% of what I've done is marriage counseling. It's just always been like that. So life happens to young folks in the military. I've said this before. It happens about 100 miles an hour faster than it does in the civilian world. So I want to say the divorce rate might be 50% in the civilian world. It's higher than that in the military world. It's higher than that in combat arms formations, and it's higher than that in special operations formations. It is a nasty, nasty thing. Communication is obviously key. You've got to maintain the relationship while you're gone because you're having intimate moments downrange. Whenever somebody dies in your midst, that's an intimate moment. And we don't talk about those things. That's kind of like bedroom talk for soldiers downrange. Those are sacred things that we don't talk about. Then you've got your wife and you come home and there's a big chunk of your life that you're not discussing with her and she knows nothing about. So this sort of a thing, post-deployment and reintegration, this happens over and over again. I remember a young man, a special forces operator, E7, coming in my office and his wife. And that joker came home and he had a beautiful wife who wanted him home. And he didn't want to sleep at home. He slept in the team room for weeks. Did not want to go home and sleep in bed with his wife. Okay, that's obviously a big red flag. So what's going on? And it came down to that intimacy question. She wanted to know stuff that he didn't feel like she had a right to know because it was sacred amongst that team member. They had a couple KIAs. And she didn't understand why he wouldn't tell her. he didn't understand why he didn't want to tell her. And it came down to that and an acknowledgement of that. Her sensitivity, like, hey, this was pretty sacred. This is pretty intimate. This is pretty, and I want to say nastily intimate. It's really rough stuff. And we only talk about that. That's why veterans go and hang out at the VFW, right? Because they can talk about that sort of a thing. But discussing it with your wife, then there's wives that don't want to hear all that. Spare me the bloody details kind of a thing. But you need to get this out of you some kind of way, because when it sits there, it just festers. And so it needs to come out, and your spouse needs to go with you to that level of hell where you've been to achieve true oneness. It's sacrifice, what you talked about, Father Chris. Sacrifice for the military spouse and sacrifice for the military member. And it really demands a much higher level of sacrifice and commitment. And no matter what, I'm here for you, than it does even in the civilian world where marriages fail.
Sure.
So it's next level stuff here, guys.
How about so Father Chris, I'll go back to you, and we're coming up on an hour here, and I appreciate both of your time. Reintegration. By no means was I a door kicker, right? Had my own issues that I had to deal with in some of the things that I was doing in the world that I was in. But coming back from a deployment, silly little things will drive you nuts in our society, right? You go out and about in public and you see people and you see things they're doing and the way they're acting drives you nuts. Do you have, from an Orthodox perspective, any recommendations on how to reintegrate post-deployment, especially for the guys that are the door kickers? Any recommendation or advice that helps reintegrating back into normal society?
I'll say one thing first, and then I'll talk about the reintegration piece. But because Father George, you said something that struck me a little bit too. Before I became a priest, and as you mentioned, I'm in the Antiochian Archdiocese. My wife had to sign a letter before I became a priest. Our Archdiocese Metropolitan Saba requires that the wife of a prospective priest sign a letter that acknowledges the sacrifice that her husband is going to make as a priest and the sacrifice that she's going to make as the wife of a priest.
Wow.
And I remember, and we had to do that when I became a deacon as well, right? Before ordination to either diaconate or the priesthood, there's a letter. But we don't do that in the Army. But I think that we can shore that up, because obviously before my wife signs a letter, there's a lot of conversation that we're going to have before she acknowledges this, right? I think the conversation needs to be had, and it needs to be frank and open before someone marries into the military. Or if you're already married and you're going into the military, there needs to be an open and frank, candid conversation about what that means for the soldier, what it means for the spouse, what it means for the family. Because if everybody's not on board, and I mean on board, we have problems from the beginning that we might not know we have until we're trying to reintegrate, which brings me to your question. Coming back from a deployment, whether you were a door kicker or not, as Father George said, right, there's things that happen that, you don't want to talk about. And you don't want to talk about them because of what it stirs up emotionally, right? You don't want to relive that.
Right.
You also have to understand that your spouse feels like there's this in part of her husband or her wife or his wife, right? Your spouse is part of you is completely inaccessible to them. And that's a terrible, terrible feeling as a spouse. And so there has to be when you come, and it's a terrible, terrible feeling, because what we believe as Orthodox Christians, marriage is, right? It's complete sacrifice for someone else. It is the two become one flesh. And that's not just a physical thing. That's everything, right? That is everything that we do. We become one. We make one decision together. We live one life together. But yet there's a part of you and a part of your life that is separated from that. And so it's also, we have to recognize it's also very natural for a spouse to want to understand. Perhaps they don't have to know all of the details, but they want to understand. They want to be able to take on the pain with you. Right? That's what we have pain from certain things that we have gone through in deployment. And our spouse wants to take that pain on with us. And in some cases, maybe take it on for us.
Sure.
And so we have to, again, frank, open, candid conversation, perhaps with a counselor, perhaps that counselor, I hope, is your priest, right? That's who I want your counselor to be, is your priest. But if I would suggest that if that's not happening, then there's other issues that I want to address within the marriage too, right? We've been torn apart. We've been living two separate lives, intimate, right? Intimacy should not be happening outside of with my spouse. So anything that I have that's intimate, the spouse should want to understand and know enough so that they can also share that pain and help us through that pain. Not know the intricate details. They do not need to know every little thing that we went through. But, we saw in Afghanistan, the first time one of our KIAs came back and I was right there, that killed me.
Casey Combs, and David Stevens.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And I talked about it with my wife that day. When perhaps not that day, right? Whenever the blackout was turned back on, right?
Yeah.
I talked about it so that she, and I wasn't doing it necessarily at the time because I was looking forward 15 months into reintegration and how that was going to work. But because those conversations happened then, right, the reintegration was different. And I'm not at all trying to say I'm a poster child. Believe me, we had our challenges when I came back, right? I mean, she saw me jump when I heard fireworks. Literally jump when I heard fireworks. And looking back on it now, it's kind of funny. It certainly was not funny at the time, right?
No, it wasn't funny at the time. That was a long deployment, and I've been married. It'll be to Matushka Pamela. I've been married. We've been married. It'll be 34 years this November.
Congratulations.
But
God bless you guys.
Well, thank God for all of that. But I can tell you this. Our marriage has not been the same since March of 2008. It just hasn't. I don't know if yours has, but nothing in our marriage has been the same since that 15-month deployment.
Same.
Yeah.
Same for us. But the same doesn't mean it's been bad.
No, right? It hasn't been bad. It's been bad and it's been good. And marriage is a lot of ebb and flow. There's seasons of marriage that are tougher than others. But we came back from that 15-month deployment and we entered a rough season.
Sure.
It lasted, I want to say, it lasted years. It lasted a few years. It was rough.
Can I ask why? For our audience? What made that deployment different from the four previous ones that you were on, Father?
Well, that was the second one. The first deployment was with 20th Special Forces Group. I was a civil affairs operator, and things were very, very different. I thought in my mind that being a chaplain wouldn't be as bad as being an operator, wouldn't be as bad as being a trigger puller. But in fact, it was, I was a lot less prepared to be a chaplain in combat downrange than I ever was to do anything else. I mean, seminary didn't prepare me. The chaplain school didn't prepare me. And when I realized I was unprepared was that day in March when those two IEDs struck, Father Chris, and Casey Combs was the first one off the bird. David Stevens was the second one off the bird. Nothing prepared me for that.
Yeah.
I did not know what to do. And I remember being in Pactica with Charlie Company, Jay Davis and them, about a year later when we were supposed to have been redeployed and Gabriel Guzman was killed. I don't think you were with us then. I think you had gone to the STB. So, but I remember when all that was going down, walking up to the situation, Chaplain, we need you. I was in the gym when we got the call that Casey Combs and then David Stevens was coming in right afterwards. And David Stevens was a medic. He was a battalion medic assigned to Bravo Company. He was from Red Bank, Tennessee. And I was from Chattanooga. And that was right down the road. So I remember showing up and seeing what was going on. And I won't even describe the horror story of what was going on. But going into the battalion aid station, there's Ramey Wilson working on this guy and all the medics. And he was so messed up that they didn't even recognize it was David Stevens until they pulled his dog tags off and said, oh no, it's David Stevens. Right.
Yep.
I remember thinking to myself, gents, and I'll always be honest with you, but I remember thinking these people need a real priest because I really don't know what the F I'm doing out here. Yeah. I do not know. Going through that trauma and on, that was the first one. Remember, Father, that was the very first KIA we had, and there were 10 more. So it was a long deployment, and we were separated for so long. And in this lengthy separation, I remember having pictures of my family on my wall, and oftentimes I would question their existence. Is this real? Is there such a thing as green grass? I don't know. I hear their voices on a phone call every now and then, and I see their pictures, but are they in my imagination? Because the only universe I know is right here. It's Mordor in Lord of the Rings, and that's kind of where we are. Are we ever getting out? And I will tell you, I want to bring this up because Father Chris, back then it was Brad McCoy, he said something to me that was very ministerial, very pastoral. I remember we're sitting in that DFAC eating, and we were talking about how painful our life was at the time. And I was like, I just don't think I can just get through this deployment. I just don't want to be here anymore. And you said that you felt the same way in Iraq before. And you told me, or you used to tell yourself, Iraq has an end. Iraq has an end. And then you looked at me and you said, Afghanistan has an end, right? And I told you this the other night. But I ran with that. And I would say to myself constantly, in the midst of all this, Afghanistan has an end. The funny thing was, years after that deployment, I deployed again with 3rd Special Forces Group, 2013. And I remember telling myself, I was in the shower one night, just in the slough of despond, and I would say, Afghanistan has an end. Afghanistan has an end. Now, this is 2013. Captain McCoy told me this back in 2008, right? So I said, Afghanistan has an end. And the devil was right here. And he whispered into my ear, does it? Because where are you now, you son of a bitch? And I was like, wow, I'm in Afghanistan. Maybe it doesn't have an end, is the way it felt. But you go through that, and your wife and your family have a completely different perspective on everything. And coming back, you're just not the same person.
Yeah.
You're just not. And you've been gone from that family for 15 months now. Thank God we don't deploy people for 15 months anymore. Right. And I think the Army was the only people that did that. Nobody else deployed that long. But 15 months, and doing that, I've was changed forever. I was a different person when I came back. And then having been gone from the family, and my wife is running the household, she was homeschooling the kids, and we had 4 of them then. She was never the same. So we talk about reintegration. Reintegration is something that you do. The prefix re means we've done this before, right? It's not really reintegration, gents. It's integration for the first time, because these 2 people are forever changed. Makes it difficult.
Father Chris, you want to say anything to that?
Yeah, well, I remember that conversation very vividly.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in the DFAC and have that conversation. And it did have an end. My timing probably wasn't the timing that, or I'll say not my timing. Thank God that those were not my words. Those were his. His timing was different than what we wanted, but it did. Well, I want to just, for the sake of our audience, for the soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, guardsmen, everybody out there, I also want to look at this from the perspective of our families. Right? You said it, Father George. Your wife was forever changed. My wife was forever changed when I came home from Iraq. She was forever changed when I came home from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
My oldest son, who's now a senior at Colorado State, Gabriel, we have our 2 angel boys, Gabriel and Michael. Gabriel was 5 months old when I left for Iraq. I was gone 14 months. I was home 13 and then gone 15. And I already said Michael was born 2 months after we left.
Right.
My wife did all of that by herself.
Right.
With the help of family, with the help of friends, just like we had friends when we were deployed, right? It's not truly by herself, but she raised our family. Really, because that 13 months I was home, you know what that was like, Father George, being in the 82nd, knowing that you're getting ready to deploy. It's not a whole lot of time at home, right? There's JRTC in there. There's ITC, intensive training cycle, leading up to all that stuff, right? And so I also want us, as we talk about how to integrate into a family that's forever changed, understand that family has also been dealing with things. Have they been getting shot at? God forbid, I hope not, right? But they've been changing poopy diapers one after another without anybody to relieve them. They've been getting woken up in the middle of the night without anybody to relieve them.
Right.
They've been getting kids to school, first day of school, Thanksgiving, Christmas, without you there. You know, they've been doing all of those things, and they have their own routine when you come back. Don't forget that they have figured out how to do this. Not because they want to without you, but they've figured out how to do this without you there. And so integration is a 2-way street. You have to recognize that it's not all about you coming back.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's a difficult thing to do, too, you know.
It is.
I kind of like things.
It is.
Kind of like things all about me, you know, from time to time in this house. It doesn't work like that.
No. I mean, that's the model of marriage, right? If we tie it back to that. So, you know, I have many, many times over the last, you know, my wife and I have now been married 23 years. My math in public is right. And many times it has come up when we've talked to other people, because people say, wow, you deployed. I'm like, no. But she raised a family while I was deployed, right? She held it together. She moved a family from Fort Irwin up to live with her parents by herself while I was deployed, right? And got my family and everybody back to Green Ramp when we redeployed. And everybody was like, these are things that they're figuring out how to do. And so as soldiers, you know, I heard several very senior general officers say it many times, and I'm so thankful when I hear someone say it. The heroes are the families whose job it is not to go into harm's way, but sacrifice everything so that we can.
Yeah.
And so there's that aspect of integration that should not be forgotten.
Father Chris, I really appreciate you coming. As an old grad, I'm supposed to say the Corps has, but it really makes me feel good to see that.
It has. It's okay.
That they have professors like you there leading them. Thank God for that. So thank you for coming on. And thank you for sharing your insights, your wisdom as an Orthodox priest and as an 06 in the U.S. Army. Father George, thank you also for all those stories as well. They're important wisdom that you all are providing to our listeners. Is there anything else you want to say, Father Chris? Anything you want to bring up? Any final closing words or recommendations or advice we haven't covered yet?
I won't bring anything up because we're way past our hour, but
Okay.
I will just say, thanks to both of you. Again, I said at the beginning, thanks for this podcast for our military. What an incredible resource to them. And I've shared it with several folks that I know, so that they can listen and thank God for what you're doing. God bless you both in this ministry. And thanks for letting me be with you for a little over an hour, just for us to share some stories. And Father George and I to commiserate on our beautiful 15 months together.
And
that's a whole nother story too. Just talking about, the stories would be endless, huh?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I will give a plug for thefaithfulcenturion.org. We're supposed to go live on the website. It is a resource for geographically isolated Orthodox Christian service members, all the different services. We're going to have links to War Priest podcast with Father George. We're going to have some references there. If you have anything, Father Chris, you think would be worthwhile for us to put on there for Orthodox Christians serving in the armed forces, please send it our way. We'll make sure to add them. So with that, Father George, we'll put it over to you. Anything else last minute?
That's about it for this time. Until the next time, wherever you are, young soldier, young airman, young Marine, Guardian, Coast Guardsman, you just remember you are not alone. You are never alone. You're in our prayers and we think about you. Please reach out. God bless you. This is War Priest signing off the net. Out.
This is
War Priest.
signing off the net. God bless you. Out.